500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, "I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man..."
G'day everyone, this is X-Band, the Phantom Podcast. Our website is chroniclechamber.com and you can subscribe to our podcasts via YouTube or through your favourite podcast apps. Do not forget to give us a rating on your podcast app and to tell a mate about us. Now, even though we're only a few weeks into 2023, we wouldn't be surprised if we look back at the guest for this podcast and the announcement that he's made this week, and it all goes down as the biggest Phantom-related news of the year. Look, I am quivering with excitement about this podcast. I've been pumped about this since before Christmas. But before we get into it, I better introduce our usual co-host. G'day, Jermaine. How are you?
Not bad. Are you Big Kev excited?
I'm excited.
No, all jokes aside, this could be a game changer, and I fully expect this to be a game changer. So I'm really looking forward to tonight.
Excellent. How about you, Dan? You're sitting there with a nice big smile on your face.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like we've had the opportunity to talk to some really big name guests and that sort of thing over the time, and probably before tonight, not a lot of people will have heard of Ash. You'll introduce him in a minute, but yeah, as excited for this podcast as just about any of the previous ones, I reckon. So yeah, just the possibilities are endless, it seems.
Mm.
All right, we've got some big raps on Ash. Now anyone who listened to episode 239, which was a reviews from the Vault podcast, you would have heard me make reference to a video game. Now, I wouldn't call myself a hardcore gamer, but it is something that I really enjoy. And I try to spend a couple of nights a week relaxing with a controller in my hand. So you can imagine how excited I was, just mentioning how excited, and look, I can't hold my hand still. You can imagine how excited I was when just before Christmas, we here at Chronicle Chamber received an email about a new Phantom video game. And I'm not doing any spoilers because it's in the actual title. And the author of that email is with us today. We've mentioned him already. G'day, Ash Nicholls. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. Good. Thanks, gents, for having me on. Really appreciate it.
The pleasure is all ours. Now, Ash, when we have a new guest on the podcast, we usually start off with a few get to know you questions.
Mm-hmm.
You cool with that?
Hit me. Yeah, go for it.
No worries. So basically, you seem like a young fella. How old are you there, Ash?
Young. That's interesting. You're the first person to say that since I tried to get into a bar a little while back. I was born in 1980, so that makes me 42, going on 43 this year.
Yep, it's good age.
Nice into the demographic of this podcast. Good.
Yeah. It's strange though. You kind of still feel like you're a little bit younger most days.
Yeah.
But, today's probably closer to 43.
Unfortunately, the age demographic of the Phantom, we're still probably considered some of the younger fans. So hopefully you'll change that.
Well, yeah, that's something I want to talk about later on. We get into the meat and bones of this game, is all of our thoughts behind demographic and all that sort of stuff. Because it's really varied.
Well, how did your interest in the Phantom come about?
So we grew up like, I don't know, exceptionally blue collar, let's say, and my father sort of didn't really have a lot of toys and stuff when he was growing up. But the one thing he did give to me was a suitcase full of Phantom comics, sort of circa, I don't know, around about the mid-70s ish, roughly. So sort of all the Frew stuff. And the first thing that happened was my sister drew all over them. So unfortunately, they're worthless. But yeah, that was my first introduction to kind of comics and my only kind of source for the comic books for a very, very long time. Probably until the Tim Burton Batman movies came out. And I was like, oh, okay, so there's a whole world out here. Because, we grew up with Star Wars and Ninja Turtles and things like that. So, but the Phantom was always a staple kind of comic book. He was comic books to me. That was it. And then in high school, early high school, I noticed that in some of the classes, these kids were trading cards, and there was like a shimmering purple going on in the background. I thought, what's that? And I went over to say, something to them because they were like the cool kids, even though we were the comic book nerdy kind of, talking about Transformers and whatnot all day. Anyway, go up to these kids and they were trading Phantom cards. And it was like this mind-blowing experience of like, what, the Phantoms too? So that began sort of like a resurgence in my early teens of getting back into the Phantom. And then the first comic book store opened up in the town I grew up in. And I begged them for a job for months, just like hung around, just harassing them. And they finally gave me a job. And it was like 2 nights a week, and it was like $5 an hour. But I had a chance then to kind of delve into more of the comic books and kind of read as much as I possibly could. And that was also when the Phantom 2040 had come out too. I think it was the DC one. And so I was able to sort of get back into the Phantom again. So it's kind of, the Phantom's always been there in the background, sporadically sort of popping up as I sort of transition through life. So that's kind of like, it's always just been there, and I had T-shirts and I had the posters, and I remember some of the Glenn Ford posters that came out, and then of course the movie in the mid-90s, and rocking up to the cinema and seeing it like the cinema only like a quarter full and feeling terrible, but still sitting through it. It was good. I still quite enjoy the movie. So yeah, that's pretty much the Phantom throughout my life, at least until my 20s, I'd say, when I started getting more interested in other things.
So what do you like about the Phantom?
That's a good question. I think to me, he's like Batman in the groundedness of the character. And as you get to know the Phantom more and you read a lot more of the comics, you can see there's like a little bit of like crazy stuff stepping in, like Stegosauruses and things like that. But generally speaking, he's just a dude, and the lineage factor is awesome.
Yeah.
And it just gives the whole series and the character so much depth that I don't think you find in a lot of the more modern, like all the modern characters. And when I say modern, I'm like, Superman onwards would have an origin story, and the Phantom has that, but then he has this huge swath of time that you can explore and you can think about. You can create your own stories in your head, and of course, that's what we did a lot as kids.
Yeah.
But unfortunately for us kids, there wasn't a lot of merchandise to back up the Phantom in terms of figurines or anything like that. So he always sort of stayed in a certain realm of creativity and expression. Like the Phantom was the comic, that was it. You didn't think of the Phantom as a TV show, even though there was, of course, the Viacom series. You didn't think of him as like a toy line that you could go out and play with in the sandpit, but he was kind of always just there in the background. I think he had that sticking power, especially with a lot of Australian kids, that we didn't really talk about him a lot. But then when you found another kid who knew the Phantom, it's like, that's you. You're just friends instantly.
Yeah.
We down in the milk bar harassing the guy for $1 worth of mixed lollies at 1 cent per lolly. That's the kind of childhood I had. It was kind of exploration and finding out the Phantom was popular, but within certain, I don't know, places, and like you wouldn't talk about it in the sandpit, but you go inside and you read comic books together. So that's the sort of thing.
I think it's still like that in a sense as well.
Very much so, yeah.
Well, we have had a recent boom with a few figurines coming out in this past year, but it's not really ones that you play with. They're still on the shelf.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that really kicked off my. We can talk about this a little bit later on. I think I might be jumping the gun a little bit, but the figurines and the new wave of NECA stuff was really kind of like the jumping off point for me in terms of, oh wow, people are still talking about the Phantom. And what was very interesting about the NECA toys was a lot of the reviews online were coming from people, young people particularly, who were like, I don't know who the Phantom is. And they're reading the description off the box like it was the first time they'd read anything about it. But they loved the character. The character still has that appeal. And I think NECA did well in the sculpting and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But it just goes to show the Phantom character as a visual, just the design, the visual aesthetic of the Phantom is appealing to a lot of more ardent comic book collectors there's a lot of people who are sort of entrenched in the Marvel and DC franchise. I think that comes back to just the simplicity of him, and the enigma wrapped around him. I think that's still very appealing.
I also think the beauty about those figurines and the boss fights ones and stuff like that is that they tell the story about the Phantom being the original.
Yes.
So with
it's very good branding.
With the recent craze of comics and comics movies and stuff like that, there's a lot of there's an increased interest in what is the original, what's the forebearer to Batman, to Superman, and stuff like that. So.
Well, there's a lot of innocence wrapped in around the Phantom, as there is with like the Rocketeer and all of those superheroes that sort of hit the screens in the 90s. And you could argue that the innocence is lost in a lot of the Marvel's sort of universe, where it's all about the spectacle, and the characters have kind of been lost a little bit. With the Phantom, it's all character. And I think that resonates with comic book fans. It might be a little bit sort of worn out of the whole current craze. At least that's how I perceive it. It's certainly something that still resonates with me, is the simplicity of it. Not in a bad way. I think it's very clever of King Features to promote the originality aspect.
I'm still getting over the part where it was the cool kids who were trying the Phantom cards.
This one kid had these luscious locks. It was like sort of Tim the Toolman's kids, sort of like movie star look. And he had the coolest. He had like the foil cards.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I've got to get me some of those. There's a beautiful one with the Phantom riding on Hero and over Sunset. And it just looked so good. I hadn't even seen trading cards like that before. If you think about trading cards like the Ninja Turtles and things like that, they were just like dodgy cardboard with a stick of bubble gum. Like these were really well done.
That's the Joe Jusco puzzle piece, the set of 9.
Yes.
Yeah.
I sold them all when I left to go to university, and only just when I started the Phantom project, I wanted to go back and buy everything I had as a kid. And of course, if they're still a reasonable price.
Yeah.
Usually again, all right.
I'm still friends with the guy I sold all my cards to. So I'm like, oh, do you still want them?
I guess 2 quick questions. Did you become one of the cool kids after you hanged out with them? No?
No. There is no amount of, once you get into high school, there is no amount of camaraderie around the Phantom that can elevate your social status. There's other things that can, but that could not, no.
At least you had the courage to at least try.
Playing guitar was much better at that, but even though, you can climb certain rungs, you can never get to the top if you start so low.
I'm sure Steve's champing at the bit to get into the questions about the game, but just quickly, you talked about selling your Phantom stuff and all that. Are you buying Phantom stuff again now after working on the game?
Yeah, so I spent 2 months in the United States just before Christmas, so from Thanksgiving right through till just after New Year's. And the first thing I wanted to do was get a copy of the Super Nintendo 2040 game. So I managed to score one of those, and for the Genesis. And then my lead developer, Billy, which we'll talk about him a bit later on, he just scored he's based in the UK. He just scored a whole bunch of comics, and kind of made me jealous because now he's overrun me in terms of like the comic cloud. So I've got to catch up a little bit. But we're going to be doing some posters and things based on the game and all that sort of stuff. So I'm trying not to collect too much just at the moment, because I could hit overdrive.
Yes.
But definitely, when I visited King Feature Syndicate in New York, sort of, I think it was the first week of December, they gave me the entire range of the Defenders of the Earth and the NECA first edition toys, figures. So I've got all those. And I've got multiples of them now too, because I bought a couple of them just online. So I might just keep a few of those.
The multiples are appearing.
Yeah.
You're in the rabbit hole.
I've got a loose one here that I tried to give my son earlier, just to say, hey, this is the Phantom. But he was not interested because it wasn't Paw Patrol. So give it another few months.
And so, what's your position at Out of Play, Ash?
I own it and I direct it. Well, I founded it officially in 2013, but I've been doing freelance game design and interactive design before then. But the contracts I had won forced me into registering a company. I was a sole trader before that. So,
Yeah.
Right.
Where do people know you from? What type of games have you worked on before?
I've come from nowhere, guys. I'm coming out of the darkness. I'm stepping into the light here. I'm stepping into the purple haze. When I say we, I say me and my lead developer, who's been with Art of Play since the beginning, pretty much. We started doing games for the Clone Wars through Hasbro. So these were like really small games to promote the toys that coming out, because in 2007, 2008, there was a huge push for Clone Wars. And I was working at a publishing house doing printed magazine pages for all these big brands. And I'd go around to Hasbro and Mattel and Moose and all these big toy guys and so sit down with their designers and work out what they wanted to put in the magazines, things like that. And I went back to the owner of the publishing house and I said, look, you're going to do gangbusters if you start a digital side of the business. You really need to be promoting multimedia and games because magazines are going to die out. And he was relatively, well, yeah, you go ahead and do it, Ash. Sort of like, fine, go off. So I went back to Hasbro and Mattel, and Hasbro were very receptive. And we basically set a structure up where we would make games for them for whatever they were promoting at the time, featuring the toys. And then I didn't know how far I was going to go. So it was just like, make some more money, prove myself to a publishing house, get a raise sort of thing. But Hasbro actually sent it off to LucasArts. And LucasArts sent me an email maybe 2 weeks later and said, well, can you guys start making games for our joint collaboration with StarWars.com and Hasbro.com? And I didn't have a team. It was just myself and another developer. I was doing all the design, all the animation. I was meeting with the clients. I was doing absolutely everything. So it's a bit daunting that we actually had to start considering ourselves to be an actual gaming studio. And of course, the money wasn't huge. So there wasn't really an opportunity to go from zero to hero. It was like, okay, I can put on maybe one extra person and, casual and get games made. But what sort of led from there was like a snowball effect. So we did a couple of games for Transformers, a couple of games for Star Wars. And Hasbro really liked it, and they were tracking really well. And these are just online games, right? So there's not a huge amount of depth to them. But I got a call from, an email from Hasbro's digital agency in New York City, and they said, can you get on a call with us? We want to chat about doing more content. And I said, well, it's funny because I'm actually in New York at the moment. I wasn't. I was sitting in my underwear in my house. So I jumped on a plane the next day. I flew to New York. And
from Melbourne?
From Melbourne, yeah. This was like a Monday or a Tuesday, and I was because of the time difference, I still landed the same day, and I was like so proud of myself that I managed to manipulate time to my desires.
So it's almost like you didn't fib.
Yeah, that's right. It is, isn't it? So I went from this weird position of just doing a few kind of low-key sort of games, nothing too much, but paid the bills, and just so happy to be making games and paying the bills and not having to do corporate work or any sort of website or other interactive stuff, like just games. It was great.
Yeah.
Then so I went from that to sitting in these marbled halls, these big statues. It was like the biggest agency in the world. And I'd written this really kind of quick proposal, like this sort of not a proposal, more like a presentation on the plane. So I walked into this room and suddenly all these people, I thought it was like with one or two people, like 15 people in this room I was giving this presentation to. And we left with a contract for 2 games. So that kind of was like a real shift in the company. And then, of course, Nickelodeon was based in New York as well. So I said, hey, I'm in New York. I've just been meeting with people. Do you want to catch up? And that relationship bloomed from a 2-game early contract to being 12 games a year. So everything sort of just went crazy, but it was all online stuff, and it was all come up with a concept, pitch it, design it, animate it, develop it, it went through QA, make sure it worked on like a dozen different devices that Nickelodeon was and Hasbro and everyone wanted, and then launch it all within the space of 4 to 5 months.
Yeah, wow.
And so we had a production line going of all these different games in different styles too. Some would be in 3D, some would be hand-drawn 2D. And what we sort of became known for was making the brand managers and the showrunners really happy, because we were kind of really emphasizing the designs that were in the show in game form. You know, we weren't taking a 2D game and making it into 3D characters or vice versa. We were just sort of really enamored with the style and would keep it consistent for the game. So we picked up a lot of work, and sort of, so this was 2013. We didn't stop working on online stuff for Viacom until 2020. So it went 7 years. We produced like 70 games.
Wow.
And in that time, a lot of them got transitioned into apps, short-running apps that run for 2 or 3 months, then be taken offline again. And behind the scenes, where we got our Nintendo developers license, we were starting to make console stuff. But the sheer volume of work we're doing for Viacom, because the Viacom family then expanded, and we had Sony Pictures, we had Paramount. So we were doing games for all the movies that were coming out for Paramount and all the movies that were coming out for Sony. So we did like Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse. You know, all the way down to Hotel Transylvania. So we kind of put our heads down in 2013, lifted up our heads in 2020, and realized, oh, okay, nearly a decade's passed.
Yeah.
We've got our console license. We need to start being serious about this, because we were kind of a bit burned out with the whole 5-month release cycle. And we were kind of creating games not based on the actual budget that they'd given us, but sort of throwing all the game budgets into this big melting pot, especially for Nickelodeon, and sort of just saying, right, well, we've got $1 million to work with this year, and we've got to make this amount of games. Where are we going to prioritize that budget? And we've always prioritized it towards Ninja Turtles or SpongeBob, and like leave all the lesser known brands, less money. And that gave us the opportunity to do some very interesting visual stuff that we wouldn't have found in most web games, and kind of elevate ourselves into this state of like, we should be doing console. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, but this, you know, we're kind of like a little bit, I don't know, loyal to the Viacom family, even though it's ridiculous, but we were. And then in 2020, they merged with CBS and completely ditched all their online gaming, most of their app stuff, and just started selling licenses off to other companies. And we were in a position where we had to decide if we're going to spend $1 million on a SpongeBob license or a Turtles license, or go somewhere else. And we decided we didn't want to pitch for anything at that point. We're kind of burned out with the brands. We wanted to do something different. And of course, the pandemic hit, and the whole world slowed down anyway, so there wasn't really a great opportunity for us to do anything. So that's where we've come from in a nutshell. This will be probably our first released console game, but we have other console games in production, including one for the BBC that's in pre-production. So, you know, we're going to be making a pretty huge leap in terms of the scope of the games. But we were already doing that with a lot of the Nickelodeon stuff to a certain extent. Like, obviously, we've done various engines to a certain level before, but we've not really taken it up to that next level, just purely because of time. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I think it was a very thorough question, very thorough answer.
Yeah.
So
I
I've
just
more questions as a result of
yeah.
that. I'm sure we'll still get through.
Yeah, just quickly. So you said $1 million for a license for SpongeBob.
I'm guesstimating.
But,
I mean, it would be somewhere around that. You know, THQ Nordic bought a whole bunch of licenses from Nickelodeon for several $1 million. So it would be based on the pitch that we would do and the amount of consoles we're releasing it on, all that sort of stuff. But the value to me was I don't want to spend this amount of money, have this amount of pressure to build a game that I'm not 100% interested in. And it was a fairly it came from a place of privilege especially during the pandemic where everything dried up, we still had enough funds to carry us through because I'd been very frugal with the business over a certain amount of time. But it was still quite dire. We were like thinking to us as well, if this goes on for another couple of years, we're screwed, sort of thing. But we were also in this position where we didn't have to necessarily jump on anything and just do something for the sake of doing it. And it was kind of a bit fortuitous because it landed us where we landed now.
Yeah.
And we could have been stuck doing something that I was only 10% interested in, 100% interested from a financial point of view, but no, I would not have been interested from, a creative point of view.
Yeah. And your work would have suffered because of that.
Yeah, I think so. I think your head's got to be in it. We'd already been doing online and app content for 10 years, and we knew the brands back to front. Every brand we worked on, we still like them, and I still want to play. I'm really looking forward to Seth Rogen's version of the Turtles. But it's sort of, there was another component too, and that was once you stepped out of the commercial gaming side of things, which is what we did when Viacom kind of seized their the machine of their online gaming side of their business. You start to wonder, like, what benefit you have in the gaming space, and also what benefit you have to the community. So you can make 13 SpongeBob games, but they're 13 SpongeBob games. You know what I mean? Like, there's just this. It just seems like monotonous. And not really contributing much to the world around us. My wife is in education, and she's helping kids learn, and we sort of felt like all we're doing is distracting kids. So we were quite lucky. We put our foot forward into a few educational fields, and we landed a 10-game contract with the ABC that started during the pandemic, and that gave us a real kind of sense of purpose for building the games. And that was a big part of it too. Like, you just want, when you stop and you look at everything you've done, you think, great, we've got a great commercial folio there. We've worked on the big brands. We know all the showrunners. It's been a great experience, but we're not really kind of giving much back. And, that sort of landed us where we are now. So we took a little bit of a break, and we were still doing commercial stuff on the side, but we weren't really 100% focused on it. And that's when we started doing these cold pitches and getting in front of people we probably would not have approached in the past.
So is that where the Phantom came in?
Yeah. So I've been checking out all of the YouTube videos on the NECA toys. I was just fascinated by how good it looks, and I thought, wow, they're really stepping things up. And like I said to you guys before, the general conversation around the toys, especially with the younger reviewers, was like, I don't know anything about the Phantom, but it looks cool. This is a cool looking figure. They read the description on the back of the box like it was the first time they'd read anything about the character, which was hilarious and fun. And I thought to myself, this has got some possibility. And then I thought, no, there must have been a Phantom game that had been released in the last 20-something years. I had a bit of a search and nothing being released, and I sort of asked around, and I couldn't find anyone working on anything. So I cold reached out to King Features, and I said, look, I'm a huge fan, have been since a kid. What's going on? Can we possibly start a discussion about this? And it was so strange to get an email back within a few hours.
Oh, wow.
To say, we're interested. What can you tell us? And we had a call with them, and it was very well received. And I went away and wrote a 20-page manifesto. Less of a pitch, more of a plea. And I explained the history. I explained the art style I wanted to use. I explained the story I wanted to go with. It's like 20 pages long. I gave a history of the company, where we've been, what I think we can do with the brand. I wanted to leverage off that feeling with the NECA toys. I wanted to bring newer kids into the Phantom. I wanted to give some justice to the older fans who've been waiting for something like this for some time, put it all into a document, hit send, and then did about 6 nervous poos. And luckily they weren't too brutal on us. They came back pretty quickly and said, this looks great. Can we have another call? And then that started the dialogue, which ran for about 6 months.
So that was 2021 then, Ash?
It was the start of 2022.
Right.
And then
It's going to be a
lots
2.5 year project.
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
We did a lot of early concept work, and it was really exploratory in terms of wanting to make it really rich in terms of more like the cover art, but then expanded into game form rather than how a traditional comic looks once you start turning the pages. You know, there's always that high level impact of a cover. I want to translate that into gameplay, have that same level of detail. And so we sent some concept art over, and that seemed to be pretty well received. And then, of course, the discussions into time frames and budget and all that sort of stuff started to kick in. And, you know, you're working with a big company, so you're not going to get turnarounds within hours. Although that's how it started, it certainly then shifted into more traditional back and forth. You know, and a couple of weeks would pass and I'd be cold sweating. Oh, is this going to go ahead? I'm nervous, you know. And then we get an email and I'll be elated for like 24 hours, and like doing dances in the garden and calling up everyone saying my life was great. And then, you know, so like dips and troughs of excitement and sheer depression waiting for responses and everything. And then eventually, so it got to December, and I think it was because I was threatening to come and see them face to face. They went, "Oh, we'd better finalize this." So yeah, I'm only joking. They weren't that worried about me, but I did go over there to King Features on the first week of December, and we signed the deal, or at least we got the first official contract sorted. And then
is that December last year or December 2021?
December 2022.
Oh, okay.
So it's really, really fresh.
Yeah.
And we still had some negotiation to do with the contract. It lasted another couple of weeks. So it was really only, I think the final one was signed just after Christmas. So yeah, we're in early stages of pre-production now. So yeah, it's a long process. Anyone who's in this game, or anyone who wants to know about making games, this is that whole process is the worst part, because at any point it can just disappear, it can be ghosted. Companies can change directors, you know, new staff can come in and they want different things. And we're kind of lucky that King Features sort of treat us well during the entire process, and we're really interested in what we had to say, and not so much interested in like, okay, well, you guys haven't done a console game before, like we don't trust you. It was like, well, we've talked to other people before, and you know, your ideas and what you want out of this match our desires, and so that was really good.
Yeah. It sounds like they're excited about the game.
They're very excited. I had maybe a 2-hour meeting with them at their headquarters in New York, first week of December, and we covered a lot of ground, and I was very impressed by what they know about the brand and where they want the brand to go. You know, obviously they're a big company and they've got to look after multiple properties, but Phantom seemed to be a big factor in what they wanted to do. So
Are they involved at all, or do they have notes on the development of the game, or is it pretty much hands off now? Or
we just got feedback on the first round of conceptual stuff. So at the moment, what we're trying to do is establish who the Phantom is going to be in this game, and we are putting together, because you know, you can look at a comic book and I can give you off the top of my head now 50 instances of the Phantom kicking someone in the head. But how do you animate the Phantom kicking someone in the head? Or how do you animate the Phantom running or moving? These are all things that have not been done. So we have to, and what we've been doing for the last month is defining the Phantom's agility, who he is within the game. It's really important that we get it right. We don't want him too cumbersome and lumbering around like the Punisher. We don't want him too agile and too sort of like nimble like Spider-Man. So he's got to meet this sort of middle ground, and because he's sort of very muscular too, the animation has to be really spot on, because you're essentially animating an anatomically correct, perfect male species, right? There's no clothing or hair or anything to sort of trick the people who are playing or watching away from the imperfections in the animation. So that's been a big part of it, and also the morality behind the gameplay and who we want the Phantom to be in the game and how to tie that in with the rich back history of the character and not seem like you're controlling someone who's different from the comics. We want the player to feel like, oh, we've just taken the Phantom out of the comic books and put him into the screen, and it just feels seamless, well, as seamless as we can possibly make it. I think the movie did that to a certain extent, and Lee Falk seemed to be pretty happy with the way it went. It was a little bit cheesy in some parts, but even then, the way a movie is shot is very strict, and you'll see the Phantom only doing limited movements within each scene. Whereas a game, you can be running or walking for long periods of time, so you're really seeing how the Phantom moves, and that's got to feel, and how the Phantom acts, and that's got to feel super important and realistic to, and keeping in with the comics. So that's been a big part just for the last month. So we submitted all that to King Features in a sort of 4 or 5 page summary, and they seemed pretty happy with it. The feedback we got was almost nothing other than looks great, sounds great. So we'll be keeping them in the loop in terms of, I've actually got to draw up a milestone list and send that to them this week. I'm being very cautious on, because you can always fall down the trap of showing too much or not enough, and you get questions either way that can really slow down production. So it's at a point now where I've got to really make sure that our team does the best they can possibly do, but also how much I show that to King Features is critical in terms of keeping the project moving forward. So they will be involved, I would say, to the standard level that most of our clients are involved in the process. They'll see an alpha build, a beta build, pre-launch builds. They'll be hands-on with the other stuff that we're doing with some of the visuals, like the box art and things like that. But the day-to-day running of things and week to week is not going to be sent over. We'll have some control over that.
So you just mentioned sending them pages and written stuff. Are you in a situation yet where they've seen, or in a position yet where they've seen any actual animation, 5 seconds of the Phantom walking or anything like that?
They've seen the concept art for the Phantom both in colour and in lineup, and we're more concerned about the proportions and making sure that they liked the overall look of the Phantom.
Yep.
They have not seen any of the animation yet. Just Friday, I have received enough from my team to put together a full character sheet for the Phantom, and that will be sent over to them along with the full story, which has been completed now, which we can talk about. That will go over to them, but that will not be something we'll be waiting for feedback for before we move forward. We'll just be moving forward because they've approved the overall look of the Phantom. So I'm 100% confident that the movement we've chosen is right for the character. There's nothing really to pit it against anyway. So it's kind of, you just have to kind of just like trust your gut instinct on this and say to yourself, you found the right balance on things. And of course I could show it to the fan base and get a million different responses, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure it's going to go over well with them too, because, a simple, like the Phantom walking, for example, we've spent a week discussing how the Phantom would walk. It's insane, wow. But I mean, that's the sort of level that we're at with the character at this stage. And of course, there's the morality side of the Phantom too, because the use of his guns specifically, and how to integrate that into the gameplay that doesn't feel like we're restricting the user, the player, but also keeping in mind with the fact the Phantom uses his weapons pretty much as a last defense. There is that morality clause, and King Features have been very very strict with us on, and rightly so, about the morality that the Phantom has, and always trying to negotiate some sort of, like using his fists and his weapons as a last resort sort of thing. It doesn't necessarily bode well for a game, because you want to be punching people, you want to be using your weapons. So we've been trying to find a balance there.
Yeah. So you've talked about concepts, you've talked about line art and people with the story and all that. Could you, while you've talked about it, could you go into a little bit of details about who's doing the line art, who's helping you with the story? What's the process from line art to animation?
Yeah, cool. So our internal team is doing all the animation roughs, and the same people have been working with us for several years.
Did you have to give them
And-
some homework on the Phantom?
Yes, yes. I have converted at least one person in my team to an ardent fan,
Awesome.
and I'm in the process of the rest of them. But I also can't come across as a dictator, so I've got to be very careful.
John, you gotta read these comics.
Yeah. What I really want to do from the beginning is get people involved in this project that already had a strong history with the brand, strong history with the character from a creative perspective. So the first person I reached out to was Anthony Spey, and he and I got along like a house on fire, and we had heaps of discussions before we'd even signed the contract with King Features. So he was on board quite early, and he was helping me out with some concept art from the very, very early stages. And before we'd even signed the contract, I was paying him to work on the character design of the Phantom. So I was like, if this didn't go ahead, I would have been in the hole for a certain amount of money. But so we were jumping the gun a little bit, but it gave us a little bit of a head start when they finally did sign the contract. So we jump into doing the animation pretty much straight away. So Anthony's going to be our key, pretty much the lead artist on the project. So at the moment, our team will be sending him the roughs, and he'll be fine tuning them and turning them into proper finished art from a line art perspective. Then I have a team of colorists. There's going to be at least 2 people coloring everything. So before I go into that, the whole structure of this game is going to be based around traditional artwork, traditional way of doing animation frame by frame, no 3D, no spine-based animation tools where you design a head and a chest and arms and legs and link everything together with spines and bones and other structures and animate it that way. There's going to be no cheapness to the animation or rushed sense of tweening frames. It's all going to be traditionally hand-drawn. It's possibly the most time-consuming, difficult way to do it, but it's the only way I can see for the brand and the game that we want to make. I mean, it would have been super easy just to model him in 3D, have him running around a 3D world, but it just didn't feel like a translation to me of what the Phantom felt like to me personally, and where I wanted to see a game like this. And, I'd seen Streets of Rage. So just to backtrack a little bit, it's going to be an action side-scrolling beat-em-up with 2 playable characters. And the story is written to be 5 chapters, each chapter containing 3 levels. So a total of 15 levels in the game. We've got some awesome storyline written by Matt Kime, who's a fellow Australian. He and I have written the story together, and that will be off to, it's actually been approved structurally. The dialogue and everything hasn't been approved yet, so that's going to go off and get approval. So it's got a lot of story behind it, and there's a morality clause to the whole game, so that if you play the game a certain way, you're going to see an ending. If you play the game a different way, you're going to see a different ending. So we want players to think about what they and how they tackle their combat and how they tackle the game as they play through. And this is a really big, important part that I think King Features were kind of digging as well. I don't want to tell people you can't draw the Phantom's guns and just mow through a bunch of enemies. And I'm not going to stop them from doing that, but there will be a clause at the end of the game that will have an effect. Basically, what they've done will have an effect on the end.
Yeah.
Have consequences.
So there's consequences, yes. So we've got multiple endings. We've got a great storyline, 5 chapters of story, each chapter 3 levels, and the Phantom's going to be traversing quite a lot of the globe. I'm not going to tell you exactly where he's going, but I'm going to.
Does he at least come to Australia? You
Yes.
have to get Australia in there.
He is coming to Australia.
Oh, that's
Hey.
I don't know how much I should give away, but let's just say the main areas of the world where the Phantom is popular, I think the Phantom will be traversing. Let's just put it that
Sounds good.
Very
So-
Nice way to put
way.
it.
So there is a certain
yeah.
Indiana Jones sort of sense to the objective, and really what gets the Phantom out of Bengala is this main objective. and it sees him as seeing quite a different. He takes Devil with him for the whole trip,
including Australia.
including Australia.
How did you get past the border patrol?
Luckily, Barnaby wasn't alive at that point. I think quarantine laws are a little bit, judging by the rabbits and the cane toads.
Yeah.
They're a little bit lax in the 30s. So obviously this takes place
yes.
the 21st Phantom during the 30s, and part of our research has been looking around the docks of Sydney during that time frame and seeing the Sydney Harbour Bridge partially built. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful time. Obviously no Opera House, so sorry fans that want to see the Phantom going for it in front of the Opera House, but that won't be in the game. We do have some classic Australian dialogue though. Matt is on the forefront of making sure that our Australian goons have some great lines, and so does the Phantom. There's one line that the Phantom says when he gets to Australia that I think will warm the hearts of many readers.
Oh,
And
nice.
And of course, the four of us are all Aussie blokes, but we've got listeners all around the world. So I'm sure that little hint you gave before about the major areas where the Phantom's popular, I'm sure that our Swedish and our Indian listeners in particular.
They'll be very interested.
Yeah.
There will have to be US. Brazil might be another one.
Potentially, yeah.
You just have to wait and
Yeah. Don't have to give everything away, but we can speculate.
No.
We'll be releasing core
That's
parts of
all.
the story around middle of the year.
Okay.
Because the core parts of the story really relate to the actual story as a whole. And I don't want to give too much away because, like I said, I want people to be playing through this game multiple times to see how their combat style and the decisions they've made affects the outcome.
A question about the story that you've just made mention with Matt Kime. Now, anyone who listened to this podcast for more than one episode would know who Matt Kime is. He's been on half a dozen times. Top bloke, and knows his Phantom as well. Is there a chance of it being turned into a comic book? Actually, an actual comic book story?
Okay, so let me talk about the releases of the game. The first release we're doing is a digital-only release, and that will be around about middle of 2024, pending the obvious pit holes that all games go through, approval processes, ratings, all that sort of stuff. Then we'll be releasing a standard boxed version of the game. Now, this will be available globally and is most likely, we haven't signed it officially, but it's most likely going to be distributed and published through limited run games. They've got a really big stronghold in the US, which is where I want the game to be featured to get the new audience in. But also they've got a global distribution for us planned. So pre-orders will go on sale for the boxed version pretty much the same day as the digital version is released. So if you want a boxed version, you can order the boxed version. There'll be a discount if you've already bought the digital version. And that will be a standard boxed version. There'll be a little slip in it and a disc or a card, and that's all you're going to get. Then we have at least one tier, maybe two tiers of a collector's edition that will be available through limited run. And I'm talking to various artists at the moment about contributing. But at the very least, there will be a limited signed version of some of the game art from Anthony. So that'll be just like limited. We don't know how many we're going to do of each of the box sets yet. Probably somewhere between 500 and 1,000. And there will also be, depending on how things work out, a version of the game that's turned into a comic. So those 5 chapters that appear in the game, because each of those chapters is going to have cutscenes, which will be comic panel animated. We'll be taking those and putting those into an actual comic book.
Yeah, wow.
Which will exist in the box set only. We're talking to printers and all that sort of stuff at the moment about getting a good deal and producing that. It changes things like the size of the box and everything like that, because obviously a comic book's fairly big. So
that's exactly what I was just picturing then. It was going to be, a small size, but no, it's going to be a bigger.
Yeah. So I want, and there'll be differences between the artwork style of the collector's box versus the regular shelf. We want the shelf box to be a little bit more modern in the way the Phantom looks and the way he's rendered and everything like that. But for the collector's set, I really want that to be a traditional. I was actually just chatting to Luca yesterday, about potentially him doing an alternate version of the game box for the collector's set. So it feels more like something you can put on the shelf, and it sits in there nicely with the rest of the collectibles. Doesn't look like too modern. But then again, I think both will look great. But yeah, there's going to be that option.
Yeah.
The sound you may have heard in the background was Jermaine's wife fainting at the thought of the he's about to spend on different versions of this game.
I'm sure we'll be able to arrange some sort of matrix. I'm sure.
But the names involved already, gives it a lot of credibility, I guess. And there's some amazing creators.
The stuff Anthony's done so far has blown my mind. I mean, I didn't really ever see it being that great in terms of like the way we've kept it looking traditional, but thrown in enough of the rendering style and the lighting to sort of give it a modern look. I really want to capture that younger audience. I want to get more people into the Phantom, but I also don't want to discredit the lifelong sacrifice the Phantom fans have made in terms of like waiting for these type of content. I don't want to go and trample on that either. So it's finding that right balance and making a game, and that's why we've gone for that side-scrolling adventure game. I want someone who's 60 years old and loves the Phantom. If you have to pick up a joypad or a joystick or a controller and just mash that A button until their heart's content and get some joy out of it, right? But then if you're 16 and you play this game, you've already played Streets of Rage and you're kind of into that genre of gaming as well, there is strategy involved. When to draw your guns, when to shoot to wound. We've got a whole level where you ride hero. It looks awesome. Like I said, you can call upon Devil to take out some enemies. We've got as much in there that pays tribute to the classic Phantom stuff that we all want to see. I know there's going to be people out there who's like, we're sick of side-scrolling beat 'em ups, but they're huge. They're always fun, and they're the games I grew up with and had fun with my friends, and that's what I wanted to translate to this too. I didn't want to do a detective series where you had to solve puzzles and crimes. There will be some elements of that in the games. It's not just going to be, like I said, you still have to think about what you're doing in this game. It's not going to be a mindless brawler, although there's some elements of it where you can just sit back, turn off your brain, and watch the Phantom mark a whole bunch of people. There will be an element to the game that is, decisively intellectual in terms of like strategy. And that's something I really want to like say to fans. We're not in this we want this game to be fun. And that's the most important thing.
Your next Phantom game can be the full-on detective. Stuff
yes.
like that.
Well, I'm hoping, because there will be some cameos in this game. I'm hoping if everything goes well, we can shift into a Defender's title for the next
yes.
I have sent a couple I will give away a little bit. I have sent a couple of ideas to King Features about how we can utilize Mandrake in this game without me breaking the contract. Because the contract is specifically for the Phantom. I can't be going like throwing other characters in there. But one of my ideas was in one of the levels we could have a kid dressed as Mandrake performing card tricks on the side of the road. We've thrown in ideas like having torn posters on some of the walls with Mandrake on them. Things like that. We really want to go heavy on some of the payoffs of those, like Mandrake and obviously the rest of the cast, and kind of build up a little bit of maybe this being the prelude to a second game. But I'm not counting chickens. Let's get this one across the line. Let's make it as fun and exciting as possible.
Yeah,
and people with 2D scrolls, like I've been playing the Turtles Shredder's Revenge. Like it's it's a 2D scroll, and you're there and you're bashing up foot soldiers, but there is a level of what you got to think of. You mentioned it before. The way you utilize combat and put in throws, and who you're going to target first, and where you got to do all that sort of stuff. Because it just looks like you just go in and bash them up. But then I watched the video, and it's just changed my complete gameplay.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I don't want people thinking they can go and just shoot anyone in this game and kill them, right? I want people to be able to pull out their guns, and we'll be having various booby traps and things and levels you can shoot with your gun to take out enemies. Much like, and that's a traditional 2D side scrolling trick where you can hit a fire hydrant in the original Turtles arcade game, and it shoots off the water, and that takes out the enemies. Like simple things like that are fun, but you can take your pistols out as the Phantom at any point and start shooting, but you need to decide what impact that's going to have on your gameplay. Now, there will be some more significant things in the gameplay that we're going to have a system where if you kill too many people in one level, you're going to have to go back and replay it.
Yeah.
Right. So we want people to feel the weight of that of their weaponry, and also how that impacts on who the Phantom is, without it being like we're bashing people over the head about it. Right. We just want to make it feel like it's natural. Like it would feel more natural if just to run through and shoot everyone in the head, but that's not natural to the character. Yes. So we want to have a complexity like that in there that's not too hard to understand. Like I said, if you want to play that way, you can, but you'll certainly know quickly that's changed everything for you. But we've got a whole list of combat skills that the Phantom has: grappling, strangle holding, a huge array of punches and kicks.
Do these develop as you play the game? Like you don't start off fully maxed out? Like are these skills that
they will, yes, because there will be combinations that you will learn to get maximum effect, which will be delivered to you at various stages throughout the game. There's also going to be a slight collectible element. I don't like doing heavy collectible things where you feel like you have to collect 100 things to finish the game, but there's a collectible element in there as well. And I'm waiting for approval on this, but we're going to be having a classic covers collectible item in the game too, which will bring up a gallery. So hidden in crates, hidden behind certain things will be various covers from the Phantom's history, and as you collect them, they'll go into a gallery. So simple things like that. I mean, I'm not saying these are unique or new, but
they're nice. They're good.
Nice.
They pay homage to the character and
paying some
fans.
tribute. Yeah, 100%. So I will probably be talking to everyone on our team, including you guys, to sort of maybe pick a top 50, which is going to be hard. Yeah, top 50 covers.
That'd be awesome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and you're listening to it on social media or YouTube,
yeah, maybe there's something to put to the fans. Let's do a poll.
Start dropping some ideas in the comments. And I'm sure, and I know Ash is a huge fan and will probably reach out as well. So make sure you listen to this, get some ideas, free drop some ideas, and you never know when you're playing it and you could tell your son, "That's my idea. That was my idea. That was my idea," and I'll go, "Yeah,
or your
Dad.
daughter.
Yeah, Dad. Whatever." Or your daughter.
So just in terms of, I just want to touch base on a couple of the other gameplay parts while we're still talking about the game.
Yeah, awesome.
So the actual story, like I said, is going to be 5 chapters, each with 3 levels. But some of those levels are going to be extracted from the main story and playable as individual smaller mini games or game modes, I should say. So there'll be a main storyline which you can play, and like I said, you might have to play it through a couple of times, see the different endings. Then there's going to be a couple of different game modes that will allow you to just. I can probably give away one of these. There will be a Phantom boxing. So basically, it's just going to be a free for all. The Phantom jumps into the ring, and you can just learn your combat skills through that, just smacking the living daylights out of a whole bunch of people.
Would that be like the Masked Marvel, and you put in like characters from the Masked Marvel storyline?
Yeah, so that will be one of the game modes that's taken out of the Australian portion of the game, because we figured if anyone's going to just be knuckle brawling, it would be in Australia, especially around the 30s. I mean, let's face it, it's still happening now. If you go down to the pub, you're probably going to get a knuckle sandwich once in your lifetime at least. So wow. In terms of like value for money, there's going to be the core part we're putting all our emphasis in is the storyline, but there will be a couple of game modes there where you don't have to play through the whole story. You can just jump into, like I said, jump into the boxing ring and just go for gold. And it's going to be like a
arcade mode where you can just put variables on and off, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff's going to be in there. Yeah.
Before you made mention 2 players.
Yeah, I've been wondering about the second player.
Could you go into a bit of that for us?
Yeah, well, the second player is going to be Diana.
Awesome.
The story begins with both of them, and she plays an integral role throughout the game in terms of participation and whatnot. Some of the levels are going to be a cooperative. How would I put this? If you're a single player playing some of these levels, you'll be controlling both the Phantom and Diana as like a team.
Is that kind of like Lego games where you swap between the two?
Yeah. Not swap between the two. Like one set of buttons will control the Phantom, one set of buttons will control Diana. You need to control both of them. 2-player mode, those same levels, one person will obviously be Diana, one person will be the Phantom. You can play through the entire game as Diana and not have the Phantom in it, and the Phantom will appear in the story. And we've written it in a way that doesn't matter which character you choose, the story will progress quite nicely without it feeling like one or two of them are missing. So Diana is the character, and she's looking awesome. I will be able to share her character and the Phantom in terms of the stills in the next couple of weeks before I tease out the animations and things like that.
Looking forward to that. If Devil's with the Phantom all the way through the game, is the Devil with Diana as well, or does she have someone else?
No, the Devil is with Diana as well. So we've written into the story that Devil will be with the both of them. And it's always considered when Diana is the playable character, the Phantom is off screen somewhere taking on his own fights. Yep. The Devil responding to Diana is a little bit kind of like he doesn't really do that in the comics. He is definitely the Phantom's dog. But I feel like Diana's earned his respect. Yeah. I feel like Diana's earned his respect enough that she could at least ask him for help and he would assist. That's how I feel.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. He's been around long enough.
Yeah. No, that's true.
Who are the enemies? Who's the Phantom and Diana fighting against? Who are these Aussie goons working for? And anyone else around the country?
I can't. It is going to be the Singh Brotherhood. We've kept it traditional. I can't tell you anything more than that. But each of the levels will have,
that's enough.
Each of the levels will have a set of the Singh Brotherhood that the Phantom is fighting throughout the levels. Like they're consistently the goons that are going to be there. But then each of the areas where the Phantom travels to will also have a select group of mercenaries that are naturally or geologically located to that region, right? So you're going to have, a couple of enemies that will come on that'll be specific to that region.
So you have Bazza and
Bazza and Big Kev.
Big Kev.
Big Kev.
You absolutely don't have to give anything else away, but like there other characters that we've already met in the Phantom universe.
Yes.
Other enemies? There are, not just the Singh, but others as well. Awesome.
Yep.
Cool.
We're trying to bring in as much as we possibly can within the budget and scope that we have, mainly the time limit.
Yeah.
Like I said, King Features really wants something out by middle of next year. So we don't have a lot of time up our sleeve, but we're doing our best to make sure that the character selection is varied and very well recognized. And also that you don't mind like knocking the snot out of them too, which is important. The Phantom will always try to solve it with diplomacy first. But fortunately for everyone involved, including the players, the Singh Brotherhood don't care about diplomacy, and so very, very quickly things devolve.
Awesome.
Is it only the guns and the fists as your weapons, or?
Yep.
You don't brought out the whip that for some reason
the 2040 whip.
No, but enemies will have long-ranging weapons to strike you with. So, like I said, this comes down to your combat methods. You might pull out your guns and wound an enemy first, and then while they're down, charge them and knock them out with your fists.
Is there a stealth element to it as well? Like the Ghost Who Walks, you sneak up on people who are.
Yes. So there'll be triggering aspects in the environments too that will break the stealth modes. Obviously, you're going to avoid walking across certain areas and certain traps and things that will indicate to the enemy that you're there.
Yeah.
We also have to be very careful within the parameters that King Features have set, where the Phantom needs to be provoked into taking out the enemies rather than him just randomly walking into a scene and beating everyone up.
Yeah.
So stealth will be in some levels. Yes.
I think King Features has got runs on the board in that area. I'm thinking there's a stage or an enemy in the Cuphead game where if you don't attack it, it doesn't attack you.
And and as you know, King Features have been big in Cuphead and in its development and funding and all that sort of stuff. So that morality stuff works really well with me because it gives the side-scrolling beat 'em up genre a bit of a new edge to it, you know. Because in Final Fight, all those classic Capcom era games, Punisher, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, there's no ambiguity in terms of like enemies come towards you, you punch them. That's it. There's going to be a little bit more depth in ours that sort of meets the criteria of the character.
And though it's a 2D side scroller, he's not like stuck on a rail. Is he like able to go top of the screen, bottom of the screen, that type?
No, so we're using Unity, which is obviously a 3D engine,
right? And
even though we're using traditional 2D sprites, hand illustrated, hand painted, the actual environment is going to be 3D. So you've got full up and down, left, right movement of the Phantom. Got some lovely parallaxing going on with the environments. We're doing digital lighting, which means when the Phantom walks through a beam of light, his whole sprite's going to change and be reflective of those environmental elements. So it's not quite as traditional as the Capcom games of the 90s, where everything was very much set in stone because they had hardware limitations and things like that. We're doing a healthy mix of traditional with modern lighting in games and modern effects, where we see them really suiting.
Awesome. And when you were talking about the art style and what have you, I've got in my head, and I know it's a completely different style of game, but do you remember that game, for lack of a better word, 13, XIII? And had that book element to it?
That played a big part in my original conceptualization of this game, yeah.
Because that's what I'm kind of picturing with the art style. Would that be in the ballpark there?
No, because 13 was cell shaded 3D, made to try and look like comics, and it succeeded for the most part. But I want people to feel like if you look at Anthony's illustrations, imagine them being rendered and playable, but also having cutscenes involved too. So the comic integration is going to be undeniable, but it's not going to be 3D cell shaded or anything like that. It's all going to be 2D, but built within a 3D environment. I hope that makes some sort of sense. Yeah. I'll be sharing full concept art and things like that, as well as early concept art of like how it's transitioned from one thing to the other.
That would be
13's great because the things I like from 13 is when you shoot someone, like you do a head kill or something like that, there'll be a little comic that pops up, little panel that pops up in the corner.
Yeah, that'll
have like a few frames of that character being hit. That's definitely going to be in our game.
Oh, that's what I was hoping when I was thinking.
Yeah. So like when you call on Devil, for example, there'll be a little cell that pops up with Devil, like a few frames of him turning his head like, oh, I'm being called upon. And then he'll rush in from the screen. So yeah, we're going to have a couple of dozen of those different things popping up throughout the gameplay. So it's going to feel like, you're playing a comic book game. I know it sounds cheesy, but I think having seen where all the Marvel and DC stuff has gone lately, I can see why they've done it, but it's definitely not the approach I wanted to take. I didn't want to just build a bunch of 3D stuff and translate the Phantom in that way. I wanted to translate it in this way. And who knows? I think it's going to be quite well received with the fan base for sure.
Well, if I can speak for the three members of the fan base that you're talking to right now, it's like everything you see and say is exciting. Yeah,
and the King Features saw the concept art from the very get-go. So, I mean, if it was stinky, if there was something wrong with it, they would have been the first people to tell me.
I think Anthony Spay, like you haven't asked my opinion, of course, nor should you, but Anthony Spay is an inspired choice of artists from like the modern generation of comic book artists. You said earlier about having the idea of the covers being the standard of art, if, for want of a better term, that comes through the rest of the game. Like his covers are outstanding. He's the books that he's produced. Like in terms of the current modern generation of artists, he'd be someone who translates really well to that style. I think that's a great choice.
Yeah, plus he's just a great guy too, and easy to get along with, which is another important factor in making video games, because they are stressful and they are quite time consuming, and you never feel like the money you're getting paid is enough because it's just so all consuming. So there is some flexibility we need from people working on the project in terms of just being chilled. and Anthony is definitely one of those guys. He's great to work with. And like I said, we spent a month together before the contract was even signed, just working on various iterations of the Phantom, and we'd be swapping heads over and changing torso widths and muscle mass and things like that, just trying to get that perfect representation of what we wanted out of this game, that melding of traditional and modern, and then our render, our colorist internally, Brandon, when he put the colors to it, it's just like, man, it looks so great. And everything sort of just started coming together. So I'm super pumped to show people more. I desperately wanted to show everyone from the get-go exactly what the game is going to be in every single respect, but I want people to feel like they're part of this process. I want to release things over time and talk about it and really sort of give everyone a beat by beat kind of rundown of what's going on. So
Ash, we've seen creators before, and I guess we as Chronicle Chamber have seen creators do that before via crowdsourcing platforms like your Kickstarters or even a Patreon. Is that something you're thinking of doing to help fund the game, or is this completely? Yeah,
so already built into the pre-production, which King Features are happy with, is around about middle of the year, maybe July. We're going to be having a Kickstarter event. It's not going to be to fund the game, but it's going to be to fund the collector's edition box set once we've ironed out all the different parts we need to do that. And also just a general promotion of the game and helping us get out there and talk to as many people. Like we've purchased a booth, or at least we've registered to purchase a booth for New York Comic Con and still organising the whole event. So we're going to be in New York with Anthony drawing in October in New York. There's going to be a few other events we want to start. Plus, we want to do some really cool fan things as well. Like we want to do a couple of arcade machines wrapped in artwork from the game and offer those out as high tier for high tier contributors. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there we want to do. And I think just in general, Kickstarter's great at getting the word out there. And it's been sort of more prominent recently for comic books and people trying to do stuff that's not 100% mainstream. So we want to definitely jump on that. So we won't be asking people to contribute huge amounts of money, but we'll definitely, any support we get sort of towards the release date to help get this game out there and visible to as many people as possible is going to be a huge part of it. And that's probably where we're probably going to need some help.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is we're going to be completely transparent too. Like as a gaming studio, the building the game is one thing, getting people to actually notice it on the shelf with a million other projects going on is another thing. And you could say that the Phantom is definitely well received within certain pockets, but there are other pockets of the globe with huge populations that know nothing about the character.
Yeah.
So that's where we want to go. That's where we want to talk to. I would love to do an event in Sweden. I'd love to do an event in India. So we'll see how we go. But there will be at least Comic-Con, and we'll try and do as many of the comic festivals as possible. I'd love to get Cosplay Chris to just walk around on the floor with a couple of switches, getting people to play. Like I want to do some guerrilla type stunt work with the game as well. Like, it's going to be a grassroots sort of marketing push.
Yeah.
I love the sound of that.
Phenomenal.
Do you have goals that you've got to set? I've got no idea about how this works. Do you have goals that you've got to set in terms of how many units you want to sell at the end of this, or is this?
There is, yeah. I mean, I can be pretty transparent with that too. I mean, we need to sell 20,000 units worldwide to make our money back on the budget.
Yeah, and that's digital and physical.
That's just we're hoping that we can manage that just in digital.
Yeah.
Because like I said, the boxed copies, it's an unknown science how many boxed copies you can move. and we probably have to limit the collector's edition to at most maybe a couple of thousand units. But price is obviously a big issue, and the economy the way it is. We've got to be also sort of careful that we're not charging too much. But we lose a percentage to the platform owners, so Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, Steam, and then we lose a percentage to King Features, which is negotiated as part of our contract. So what's left for us is, it's okay, but it's we kind of need to make sure that we're moving units to justify another game, basically, and to justify the survival of the studio. Not that sounds too dark, but
no, but I guess where you've come from in the sense of, you were talking about pumping out 12 games a year for Nickelodeon, and a game turnaround in 4 or 5 months. Now is your studio devoting all of the next 18 months to just the Phantom game, or do you have other projects as well?
Well, we have other projects that will be kicking into gear once our design team has finished as much as it can do on this particular game. So we're trying to really organize our team members so they can move on to other projects. We are covering 100% of this game build as part of just from our own resources. It's not going to be privately funded.
Yeah.
Government funding doesn't exist for this type of project, because it's assumed that if you've got money to pay for a license for a game, you've got money to build it, or you can just go and get private funding. So we obviously, from a business point of view, we have to make sure the game is released in a certain amount of time. We can't have this stuck in production for 3 years, because we'll just be bleeding money. So it has to be released in a certain amount of time, it has to be done well. So we have to put the money into it in a short amount of time to get it out the door. But then it has to be perfect. So there's a lot at play here. So our team, we're dedicating probably, 3/4 of the year solely to this. And then by the time it goes into more of the development phase, a lot of our artists will have time to start working on other things. So like I said, we've got a game in pre-production with the BBC, so that will be kicking into gear towards the end of the year. So at the moment, we're really just trying to put everything we have into the Phantom, and not only with our internal team, but like I said, with Anthony and with Matt and a whole bunch of other people that we get on board for this as well. So yeah, it's a daunting process, but also we hope the risk to reward ratio is there. So if we put together a great product and get it out into the fans, we're hoping that will be enough to get us across the line.
Sure.
Obviously, if we can do anything more than 20,000, it's going to be great. It's going to mean profit. It's going to mean King Features is going to say yes to another game. It's going to be, if we could double that, if we could do 40,000 copies worldwide, I mean, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So you mentioned
with a capital PH.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that King Features gets a percentage. So I guess we've, at different times, a lot of fans have looked into licensing different items with King Features, and a lot of the times it comes down to a flat fee, but it sounds like it's more a percentage with you guys. The whole gaming environment is structured around residuals. So there is no way just to pay a single flat fee in this day and age and get away with being able just to make a game. Yeah, right.
I mean, even if I paid Nickelodeon $1 million for a SpongeBob or a Ninja Turtles licensed game, they'd be wanting 20 to 30% of the back end.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you have to pay an upfront fee to King Features?
I can't really get into the contract side of things.
Right. Gotta ask.
Only because I've signed various documents that tell me I can't. But yeah, I mean, what I'll say is that the standard procedure has been followed with King Features that we would have had to have followed with anyone else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And I think that we weren't really in a position to say, well, we're only going to give you 5% of the sales because we're an up and coming console developer. Even with our history of working with big brands, we know how to deal with getting things across the line in a great, fun way very quickly, and we've got all that skill behind us. We're not in a position to be bargaining, on those sorts of things.
Is there anything like you talked about publicizing and or even post production? Like, is there likely to be a chance for you to get a finger in the pie when it comes to any merchandise that comes in relation to the game? Do you foresee anything like that? Like, you've come up with the concept, you've got the creators on board, they're all your team. You've brought that to King Features. If they have any merch that comes out of it, surely you'd be entitled to a piece of that pie.
Yeah. Well, there's no contract for merchandise as part of the game because the game is the game. So we would have to negotiate a separate contract with King Features for merchandise.
Okay.
And we have a contract for the digital, and we're still in negotiation on the contract for the hard copy version of the game. They exist as two separate entities because each entity will have a different percentage requirement of how much we lose. Because obviously, Nintendo aren't making the same money from a digital download as they are on a boxed sale, for example.
Sure.
So the financials are all different. So they're two separate contracts. And the boxed copies, there's a lot more going on there with the collector's edition and all that sort of stuff. But yes, if I wanted to negotiate with King Features right now, I could to do T-shirts, to do, like I said, the comic version of the game, statues, whatever we wanted to do, we would be entitled. And that, we wouldn't be facing a double whammy then of losing 30% of the game sales to Nintendo or to PlayStation.
But obviously, that's not your core business, so to speak. You're a game developer, and you're making. Yeah,
we have dabbled with it in the past. I mean, it's certainly something we'd like to do. Like I said, I'd like to do arcade machines. I'd like to do a whole bunch of things. It's just going to come down to time and budget.
Of course.
Anything we can get out of the Kickstarter mid-year is going to be a huge boost for us, just in terms of like cash flow and in terms of like getting promotional side of things moving forward. Because even though the Phantom's established, 80 years old, etc., the marketing machine that is behind it from King Features and from other entities is zero, pretty much. As you guys would know, the existing social media accounts and things like that for the Phantom don't really have a huge draw card. So we're really left with going straight into grassroots marketing and trying to pump the game up as much as you possibly can. Now, look, the NECA sales have been incredible. So my logic is, if we develop a good product like the NECA toys did, because the toys went out to people who were purchased by people who were not interested in the fan, they just loved the look of it. So we want to capture that audience with the game as well. And that's going to be critical too. If we can get like a quarter or more of those sales from new people, then we'll be super happy with that. But yeah, they've obviously sold more than 20,000 toys. So that's where we want to be. And look, I don't know the exact number of toys and figures that they've sold, but it's got to be somewhere around 50,000. So if we can get that amount in game sales, we should be pretty awesome to make more stuff down the line.
That's great.
But like it's risk to reward. Like I keep saying, like we had very low risk working for Viacom for 10 years, but the reward wasn't that great because you'd slog it out for year and year and just get a minimum budget for games. We've turned, and the irony is the first game that came on the Super Nintendo was published and made by Viacom. We're using Viacom money to make this game. So yeah, we're throwing everything we have at it, and we're putting everything we possibly can over the next year and a half. And we just hope that we can get it across that threshold of 20,000 sales.
Now, while we're talking money, and I know you might not be able to give us exact figures, what's a rough figure, if you can, that this game is going to cost? Are we looking at
in Australian dollars or US?
Whatever.
Australian, so we'll go Australian, but if you can...
in Australian, over 500.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. It's going to cost that much. I mean, a year and a half of a full studio's time is, it's not going to be a full studio because some people will translate into other projects towards the end of the year. But, basically speaking, a whole studio of 12 plus people putting time into this. And, some of those people are only doing a few $1,000s worth of work here and there. But overall, that will be the sort of, once we translate it from, because, the currency's crap at the moment. Over $500,000 Australian dollars will be spent on this.
Yeah.
How much will be, the punter at the getting the download and that sort of stuff. You got an idea for the price point for those?
Price point, we roughly around $30 to $35 digital sale. Box set's going to be roughly 50 to 60.
That's Australian.
And that's probably Australian to be 39.
Geez, that's all right still.
Yeah,
that's a fairly low price. That's a very reasonable price.
Yeah, we want it to be reasonable for the download. It's not a huge game. Like, we're expecting the storyline to be played through in like 2 or 3 hours. But in the multiple versions of the story and stuff, we hope people go back and play it again. There'll be collectibles and things in the game, so the replayability is going to be high, plus the other game modes. We could have gone with a cheaper way of making the game for sure. We could have gone 3D and low poly and kind of roughed it out that way. We're kind of doing the most expensive way of making a game possible this day and age. So kind of shot ourselves in the foot a little bit there, but like I said, it's got to work and it's got to look like something that clean transition from comic to game. And look, I don't like a lot of the modern Marvel type games that much. So I have to be making something that I feel creatively fulfills me, as well as something I want to get up and throw our entire, a huge sum of money at least at.
Yeah.
So,
so if I'm hypothetically, if I'm a 45-year-old man who doesn't own a gaming console, I've got no A button to smash. Is when you say it's downloadable, can I just jump on a
you can
desktop?
jump on a PC or Mac and log in and create an account with Steam.
Right. Okay.
And Steam will allow you to play it on any laptop or PC or Mac. Cool. Or Mac,
as long as I'm not going to have to start lining up at JB Hi-Fi for the PlayStation 6 or 7 or whatever's next one out.
No. I mean, that's another thing too. Like, there's part of the budget is making sure it works nicely across all consoles. And the beautiful thing about the design style that we've chosen is, whilst it's costly to produce, because we're hand drawing it, we're hand painting it, we're meticulously studying the movements of the characters and things like that. There's no cheap way of doing that. It's very low in terms of what it needs to run. So, we're not creating like a 4K super high res, high polygon count 3D game. So it's not really sucking the life out of your console. It's going to run nicely on the Switch. It's going to run as nicely on the Switch as it will on a PlayStation.
Cool. Oh wow!
So there will be, or an Xbox. Yeah.
That's what
so there will be that benefit too when it comes to porting to the different consoles and things like that. We're at least hoping that will save us some headache.
And will it be released on all of those platforms at the same time, do you reckon? Or?
We're hoping so, yeah. Look, it's possible that Nintendo will, because I've reached out to Nintendo and said, we're doing this game. What can you offer us in terms of promotion, publicity, if we do an exclusive Switch launch first? And if they give me a tepid or no response, then we'll just do all platforms. Nintendo have generally been really welcoming of publishers launching on their console first. So that's a possibility, but otherwise the digital releases will go out all at the same time. And then, like I said, the box set will follow shortly, and then the collector's box after that.
Yeah, cool.
People can decide whether they just want a standard box or if they want the collector's box at the same time. Collector's boxes, don't know the retail of those yet, but probably somewhere around you can go onto limitedrungames.com and you can check out the other box sets they've done. They published Shredder's Revenge. They've got a Shredder's Revenge box set out at the moment. So you can kind of see the stuff that they're doing. I don't want any of that sort of like crappy show bag stuff in our box set, like no keychains. I want cool stuff that people would literally want to frame or collect or put on the shelf.
Awesome.
We're talking, I'd really like to talk to Boss Fight and do maybe an alternate carded version of one of their figures.
Oh, nice.
Things like that I want to do in the box set. Like, I don't want it to be some hokey collection of stuff that you're paying for, but you never really want to put on a shelf. You know what I mean? Like some cool stuff is where it's at. So yeah.
A question while we're talking about platforms and stuff like that. What are the markets like? Because obviously you've got Australia, US, and Europe that probably use a lot more like Switches and Xboxes and all that. Is that the same compared to someone like from India or Brazil or
India and Brazil both have very low console purchasing. I mean, people who play in India and Brazil are most likely going to be playing on PC, or I think it's only like 28% of total gamers in those countries are playing on a console of any kind.
Yeah.
What we had in our original proposal to King, which we have to iron out over the next 6 months, is, and Shredder's Revenge have just done this, Streets of Rage did it, is to do a iOS and Android port for mobile.
Oh, wow.
This we feel will greatly help the Indian and Brazilian and a lot of other countries that have a lower socioeconomic, they have low socioeconomic issues, but also people are just traveling more and they're active a lot more. There's less of that sort of stay at home, play console games till you pass out kind of gamer base. So we want to do a mobile version for them, which will be a port similar to what they've done with Turtles and with Shredder's Revenge and with Streets of Rage, where it'll be slightly cut down version of the console game, but all the core stuff will still be there. So we'd be hoping to do that towards the end of 2024. So there'd be kind of like a few month break between console launch and then mobile. So mobile would launch probably closer to Christmas of 2024
Okay.
Good Christmas present.
Give the kids something to do.
And it'd be much cheaper too. Like we're talking like $5 or $6. But you're obviously not getting the same. You wouldn't be getting the same resolution. You wouldn't be getting the same features.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to put a paywall in there. I don't want to just do like the first level for free. Then you got to cough up to $6. I think it's better just to charge up front. Tell people they're going to still get their 15 levels. There'll just be some things that won't be in there that are in the console.
Yeah.
And of course, I personally don't like to play mobile games in the sense of like touch controls and things like that. I'm very much a gamepad kind of person. So, but we don't want to overlook that audience. We think it's important that we do something for them. Because the consoles. I mean, I don't even want to pay $700 for a PS5. I mean, and I've got to have them for testing, and I can write it off on my tax. So it's kind of ridiculous to think that everyone out there is going to have a console. I mean, I know the Switches are a little bit cheaper and things like that, but yeah, we want to make sure everyone's covered. So yeah, the mobile version will go out towards Christmas of 2024.
Well, my daughter is excited about Dad buying her a Switch game. So because at the moment she's having to buy them herself. So the fact that Dad will buy her a Switch game, she's excited about the fan game.
I think someone in the comments on your Facebook page wrote, "Finally, now I can buy a Switch" or something like that, which I thought was heartwarming. I think it might convert a few people to consoles. But like I said, we're trying to cover as many people as possible, and we may have to do a Kickstarter towards the end of towards the middle of next year for the mobile port. I'm pretty certain that once revenue starts rolling in from the console version, we'll be able to cover the mobile port. But it's on the cards. And I know there's the whole gaming world is all over the place. So it's kind of common now that everything's going to get ported to mobile at some point because companies want revenue, players want the game on their system.
Is there going to be something else that happens in a lot of games? Is the old DLC? Is there any scope for that?
I haven't discussed it with King Features yet. It's not in the contract. I would love to do a DLC. My original idea.
Ash, before you go any further,
what's a DLC?
For the non-gamers, what's DLC?
So it's a digital download, or a download pack, basically, that will come out as like an addition to the original game. Cuphead just released one relatively late last year, I think, which was just a whole bunch of different boss fights. So it's basically just an extension to the original game that you either give away for free or a very low cost that just adds to the original game, keeps people interested, maybe adds to a few more sales of the original game. And it's usually cheap. It's like a quarter or a third of the original game price.
Does that adds to the replayability?
Adds to the replayability, adds in some more characters. Sometimes people will just give a character update, so they'll just give you a whole bunch of new characters to play as. My original idea was that it was going to be like Turtles in Time, where you would travel through the different time periods and meet the different phantoms and have different battles, that
That's
was
the first Phantom, the Swearing of the Oath.
Yeah. Unfortunately, production
Jungle
time
Patrol.
and budget would have just meant we could never get it done and made in time. So we had to stick to a certain time period. Yes. I thought it would just be cool and it's so much fun to be doing pirate scenes and things like that too. So, but anyway, we have thought about it. It may go onto the cards as we get further through production. It's not part of our original scoped contract with King Features. I don't think they'd have any issue with it if we presented it to them. I would like to see some numbers once the game's launched before I made that decision.
Yeah,
but I'm not ruling it out.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, we've spoken a lot about the art and the game style, but what about the soundtrack? That's a very important part of games. What type of? Well, you do have anyone? Or it's all happening in house, so I guess you're not outsourcing this to any.
We outsource audio, some of our audio production, to a freelancer by the name of Clark Aboud. Clark has written all the music for our Nickelodeon games for the last 10 years. And he writes for console games. So he'll be doing a score for the Phantom game. He's already received a copy of the storyline. And I will be having discussions with him over the next couple of weeks to write a score for each of the parts of the globe that the Phantom will go to. So music's going to be a big part. Voiceovers is going to be a big part too. So I don't know if that was going to be your next question, but basically,
Billy Zane
to that.
Billy Zane in?
I have got Billy Zane's promotional company, his agent. I've got all that information in front of me. I'm putting together almost like a second pitch deck just for Billy, and I will be sending that to him or to his production company as soon as I feel like the quality is there, that he'll not look at it and think, who are these Australian hacks? And I will then put it to the community, because I want the community to be involved with this, and say to them, what do you think? Because I'd love for him to, at the very least, depending on his time, to get him to narrate for those who came in late, opening animation. He doesn't necessarily need to be the voice of the Phantom if he doesn't have the time, although the dialogue would mean he could go in and out of the studio in half a day. I mean, the dialogue in the game is not going to be like this epic, movie length requirement. He could probably get it done in a few hours. So I think I'd put it to the fan and see if they wanted to contribute to help us get him on board in terms of the finances and things like that, because he's not going to be cheap and we don't have a limitless budget, but I think it'd be awesome. Yeah. And I'm willing to travel to him. I'm willing to go to the UK and sit with him in the studio and quote unquote direct him. which will be basically just me sitting there in awe. It's not out of the question.
Dan met him a couple of years ago.
Yeah, he has been on the podcast before, and we had had the absolute privilege. Met him at Brisbane Supernova, and persuaded him over the course of a couple of days to sit down and talk fandom with me for half an hour. I can't remember which episode of the podcast it is, but
I'll have to go back, man. That's awesome.
33, I think.
Tell you what, he has got an absolute presence. Like he is an absolute. He's a film star, and he knows it, and he's got that aura about him. So I really hope that would come through.
Well, if he can give you a half an hour for free, he could probably give us 3 hours for several $1,000s, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Hopefully. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, certainly feel free to name drop if you think that's going to help. So basically, I want to get the game screens and everything ready to a point where he can look at that and go, wow, that looks cool, and talk to him about the way we're producing the game and our connection to, because obviously for him to be involved in the Phantom and obviously talk to you guys as well, he obviously cares about the character. So I'd be happy to go to the UK and sit down with him and
book a studio, and we might even be able to use. We've got friends in the UK, right? And Clark is actually our sound guy. Has actually just moved to the UK too, so we might be able to, put together a ramshackle production to get him to come and do. And look, he doesn't necessarily. We don't need to go into like a super fancy shoot or anything. Like, if you've heard the VO for video games over the last 20 years, the bar is set quite low. Let's put it that way. So anything above mediocre in terms of production is going to sound awesome. And look, let's face it, he would add so much more to the game and help us get some more out the door. So,
well, if you need someone to hold your bags, just let me know. I'll fly over there with you.
Awesome, man. Yeah, we'll take over half the fan base to the UK and just warm him. I'm sure he'll like that. No, but it's definitely on the cards. So I've got to get the pitch deck ready for him to a point where he thinks, okay, this is legit. I can get behind this. Including the storyline. That's a big part of it. So I want to get that approved as well. We have been using over the last 10 years various voice actors to mimic. We've got a great voice actor who mimicked Casey Jones for us for a game, and we're probably going to be using him a fair bit in the game as well. So, so it's going to be a big part. The music score and everything's going to be huge.
Awesome,
phenomenal.
Yeah, we're not using stock assets from some website or anything. It's all going to be custom scored depending on where the phantom is, and the cut scenes are going to have their own score to them. And so
will there be the cut scenes or voiceover, or voiceover with subtitles, or what's the
voiceover? Yeah, so the original contract for King Features said they didn't want to do a localized version of the game, meaning they didn't want to produce a version of the game for each region, each language. So the game will unfortunately only be in English. We're not doing we're basically not releasing in any other language. So the cutscenes will be comic book panels with voiceover and obviously the text inside the panels.
Yep. And during the gameplay with the comic book style, when someone says something, you're going to have a little speech bubble come out.
Yep.
Oh.
Could there
which is very similar to that 13 game you're talking about too. Yeah.
Sorry to keep butting in. You talk about individualizing or localizing languages. Could there be an option for Swedish fans to choose blue on the Phantom suit, or Brazilian fans to choose red?
Yes, but I have to put a big caveat on that. It would probably come as a DLC post-launch. There's a cheap way of doing that visual aesthetic you described, and there is a good way of doing it. We want to do it the good way, not the cheap way. I mean, I could automate that process in Photoshop and have it done in about 10 minutes, but it would look like poop. Yes, I do want to do that. I would love to do it for those fans, but obviously it's going to come down to how many units we can get out the door in that first digital release. Now I can say, right, I'm going to dedicate a DLC pack. I'm going to pitch it to Kings, and we'll get it out a couple of months after release. It's not a huge amount of work, but it's enough for it to warrant its own expansion.
Sure.
And depending on how well the game sells in different regions too, we may be able to do a localized version of those particular games down the track too. That's not out of the question. Just for timing and for efficiency, King Features, and for approvals, King Features only wanted to focus on an English release.
Yeah, fair. Okay.
We did negotiate in the contract. The one thing I can say about the contract is we did negotiate for the physical release in India as well, which was not in the original agreement. But we said that there are so many fans in India, it makes no sense not to release a physical box, even if sales may not be as high as other regions. We have got that included now.
That's a good idea.
Certainly, Europe and the US and Australia is definitely covered in multiple aspects, but it's always been difficult for the gaming publishing industry to sort of figure out how they reach certain parts of Asia. And sometimes it's just that they put it in the too hard basket and just say, well, if people in India want to buy the game, they can buy it on Amazon like anyone else.
Mm. Okay. So just a I know we're jumping around all over the place at the moment, but you talk about that Matt Com as your story or helping you with the story running. I think is going to be very probably helps answer this question. But do you have any key Phantom tropes or elements that are non-negotiables for you that you must have in the game, in the finished product? You've talked a lot about the morality of the character, which fills me with confidence. But are there those sorts of things that you really want to? They're just a must-have for you.
Yeah, well, before Matt and I started working together, I sent him a very basic rundown, and we had a chat about it on the phone, actually, about the core things I wanted in there. And that was all sort of the geo stuff. I wanted to make sure a Phantom covered a certain amount of space, not only to fulfill fans' epic kind of like expectations of like seeing the Phantom in their own particular region, but also an aesthetic visual difference shift in the game, which a lot of these side scrollers don't have. Fight through a city, changes in terms of like where your location is in the city and things like that, or a subway, or up above ground, or on the docks, or whatever the case may be. But I wanted something a bit more grand, a bit more epic. So that was one of the requirements. The morality clause was a big requirement. Not before we'd even gotten all the information from King Features. I wanted something in there that helped people connect with the character that they had in the comic books. Because, like I said, it's easy just to throw the Phantom into a room and ask players to beat up a bunch of people. But that's meaningless. There's got to be something behind that links back to the comics. And so Matt and I had probably 3 or 4 calls after that, and he did an initial early draft, and it was good. But it still didn't have that aspect to it that I really wanted, that morality clause in there, and that the draw card from the comic book to the game was just not there yet. And then we had a conversation, and he'd written something, and it literally it gave me chills. It was so good. And I said, that's it. That's what I want. And we fleshed it out a bit more. And I was like 2 minutes away from picking up my son from childcare. So I had to pull myself out of like this like dizzy haze of excitement about this game and talk to a toddler again. But it was he's knocked it out of the park, I think, in terms of what was required of him for this. And it's difficult because he's not written for a video game before, and I would argue that most people who do write video games are terrible at writing comics. So you've got to really find that nice balance and someone who can translate it, and I think he's done that exceptionally well. There were a couple of other things in there, like I wanted Diana in there, and I wanted their bond, but the two of them to have a strong bond in the storyline that would translate into the game as well. I wanted the Phantom to feel like he's part of a world and not just dropping a character into a scene and asking him to belt people up. It needed to feel like there was a consistent flow through it that met with who the character is in the comics. I think Matt has done that. He's knocked it out of the park. Some of his Australianism, I'm like, did they even speak that way in the 30s? It sounds too TikTok. But no, he's right. We did some more research into it, and yeah, there's some great stuff in there.
You mentioned earlier about like when you're comparing Phantom to like your DC and your Marvel characters, about there being an innocence in the Phantom's world. How do you feel that that will translate in your game?
Good question. The ending is where you're going to see it, and I cannot give a single thing away about the ending, but there will be some tropes in there that you see in side-scrolling beat-em-ups, and then you'll be drawn into the story as you go. And the innocence of the story, let me just say this, the story has a lot to do with lineage and family. And I know as a dad, I've only been a dad for a few years, that sort of stuff hits home. And it's prevalent in the comics from day one. And it would be very easy to ignore those sorts of things. But it's a very strong narrative point throughout the game. Family, lineage, generations, it all comes into play. And then the ending is gangbusters. Like I can't begin. Like I said, it gave me chills. Matt and I fleshed it out, and once we put it down, I was like, "That's it, we've got it." And I'm hoping that fans will get as much out of it as we have just in writing it. And we'll be sharing the story in its entirety on launch, a few days after launch, so people can sort of see. We're going to do a little bit of a YouTube playthrough of the game, and we're going to talk about the decisions we made at various points in the playthrough and how the story integrates with the play. So people don't necessarily have to play through it a couple of times to see the endings, but it's a corker. It really is.
Awesome.
I hope that gives enough away. Does it?
No, I think that's perfect.
Let's lineage and generations. Let's talk about father son lineage and generations. It's a big part of the Phantom, and I think that plays to, and it's a big part of Batman too, to a certain extent. But obviously, Phantom did it earlier and did it better. The whole father son and lines of generations, I think, is critical, and that's what we've got. I think it adds to the simplicity of it. I mean, the Phantom's mortal, and we all know he's mortal. We've seen all the Phantoms before him, and it's that mortality. That leads to the simplicity, I think. Because you lose the simplicity when a character can do anything. Like look at half of the Marvel characters. You don't feel anything because you know they can survive almost everything.
Yeah.
So with the Phantom, you knew his limitations at the start, and that's what makes him so powerful. It's the simplicity of those limitations.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. When see this? When can we see some images or some gameplay footage?
Images will be coming in the next fortnight. I will be able to release a full Phantom character sheet so you can see the vast majority of his moves, how he looks like while he moves. And then we'll be looking at the end of the month for very first teaser in-game images. So we're not too far off. Yeah, we've only got a year to make this, so literally every month is there's got to be big things happening every month, basically. Yeah. But like I said, we've spent the whole month just trying to get the Phantom running, walking, jumping, even the detail of him, how he would pull out his guns and how he puts his guns back in his holsters. Everything like that has meticulously been, like, frame by frame, has gone through myself, my animators, then through to Anthony, then back to me. And because that's the most important thing, is like if the Phantom doesn't feel legit. I mean, the 2040 game on the Super Nintendo was fine, but the stilted animation just never felt like the Phantom, So that's what we're going for. It needs to feel the Phantom.
Yeah, wow.
Actually, you got twice the work because you're doing it for Diana as well.
Yeah, so from a production timeline point of view, Diana will be done in really small segments across the entirety of the year, because once we've got the Phantom and all of his actions and everything in there, Diana's will be variations of those actions.
Yep.
So we can spend a little more time with her throughout the year, but we had to get the Phantom looking right early on, because I think if fans looked at it and thought, oh my God, he's too bulky, or he's too much like Spider-Man, or he's got superpowers, what's going on? That's the sort of stuff we wanted to nail down early on and make sure that fans were like, okay, these guys are taking it seriously.
Yep.
And we have. I mean, rarely in our history of 10 years have we spent an entire month talking, debating, hundreds of threads about how a character should look and move.
Are you enjoying that extra level of depth?
100%. 100%. Last night I sent the first... So all of the frames I set up in a little sequence last night and sent them back to Anthony and said, hey, man, this is looking really great. Here's what you've been working on in its entirety. Here's a fan running. Here he's walking, he's jumping, he's pulling his guns out. And it looks $1 million, even just as black and white line art. And I showed my dad, who spent 20 years not knowing what I do for a living.
But back on the Phantom, he's taking an interest.
Yeah, and even he was like, oh, I understand how you're doing things now. It's we're working in such a traditional way that my dad can understand it, which is make of that what you will.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Wow. So when you said about all the images and the gameplay footage, that's all going to be posted on the website and the social
We'll give it to you guys a couple of days earlier.
For our patrons?
Yeah, for your patrons. And
there's a reason to sign up if you're not already a Patreon.
And then what we'll do is we'll be releasing it on all of our socials first, and then sort of mid-year we're going to be updating the teaser website to have actual screenshots and videos and things. You're going to be seeing a few videos from me personally talking about things as I go. I'm not an orator by any stretch of the imagination, but this is going to be a good chance for me to get in front of the screen and talk about things, because I think it's important that particularly people who play a lot of video games but don't know what goes into the production and how much, gets invested in people's lives. I mean, this is my life for the next year and a half, and there's a certain big chunk of this riding, the success of our company rides on the back of this. So, I want to make sure people understand what's going into it and the fun that we're having, but also just the lengths that we're going to make sure that the character is treated with respect, and all the little subtle nuances that we're going for.
Yeah, don't say stuff short in your oracy, because anyone who's listening and not even watching the video should be able to hear the passion that's coming through in your voice on
thanks,
on this
man.
project.
Mm-hmm.
How many are you spending on this at the moment, Ash?
How many hours?
Yeah, a day.
When do you go to sleep?
Anthony's obviously based in the US. I've just come back from the US after spending 10 weeks there, because my wife is American, so I've got my in-laws are all American as well. So I'll probably do a 16-hour day at this stage.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then it's broken into 2 shifts. So I'll do a day shift when my son is at school, then I'll do bedtime stories and play games and things after he gets, over night time, and then I'll do another night shift and talk to my team in the US and my team in the UK. And we've always operated with people all around the world working on projects, even during our 10-year stint with Viacom. So it's where the style of how we're getting this game made, from the sense of lots of different people collectively working in this game and then feeding it all through one central hub, is the same as how we've done things always. But I wouldn't be able to do 16-hour days if I didn't have the same level of passion as I do for the Phantom. I mean, we also have a back project from last year that we're still wrapping up for the ABC, which is still finishing up. So I'm doing a fair bit of time on that as well, just to try and get that across the line, because it was supposed to be finished in December, and now it's running through until February. So, but it's at least a 16-hour day, 2 8-hour shifts roughly, with a little bit of a break. I'm lucky because my wife takes care of my son in the morning, so I do have that ability to sleep in a little bit. And also, with everyone being overseas, there's kind of like that little bit of a gap in the Australian morning where the US is wrapping up for the night. So you do have a little bit of time when no one's harassing you. But most of I'm one of these people who has always been a night owl, to say it nicely. A zombie, if I was to put it correctly. Which means my creative juices flow from about 9 o'clock at night and finish up at 2 a.m. and I regret it the next day until it becomes 9 o'clock the next night. It's part of the creative kind of, like, lots of people who have addicts, they're addicted to certain things, and I'm lucky that sugar and working is my only two at this stage.
And the Phantom.
And of course. Well. But the sugar feeds into the work, which feeds into the Phantom. So it's all like this big nasty circle of life.
Well, I'm amazed, shocked, wowed at what you've given us tonight.
So are we. And look, we found out other people had pitched. We found out other bigger companies had pitched, but they didn't have anything behind it. So it's amazing to me that we've got this across the line. There isn't a single hour of the day that I think to myself, okay, I can just get something across the line here. I don't take it for granted. I know the fan base. I know the brand, and I know how important it is that whatever we put out needs to be at a certain level, because it needs to lead on to something bigger. And needs to support the fandom moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. So look, I don't know about Dan, Steve, if you got any more questions, but I did not expect. I expected a lot more no comments. You've been very
trying to be
very
as clear as
forward.
I want people to trust us. I want people to say, right, these guys know what they're doing, and I'm not saying that there won't be mistakes along the way, but we're certainly putting everything we've got into this. And talking to you guys was the very first thing we wanted to do. And the Australian fan base has obviously been there from a very early point, so we're very wary of that. But we also do need to reach out to everyone across the globe and get the word out that this is happening. And we're very serious.
Yeah. Oh, look, just hearing in the last 10 minutes about your work day and the level of commitment you've got to this, I'm really grateful that you've reached out to us, Ash, and that you've taken the couple of hours out of your day to talk to us and to talk.
The pleasure is all mine.
No, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the year you've already put into it and the 18 months that is to come. It's and thank you for being as transparent and letting everyone in on the journey, because I think it's a wonderful opportunity that we've all got to get behind you and support it, and hopefully all enjoy playing through what sounds like a really fun and authentic game.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it, mate.
And if any time over this next 18 months you ever want to pop on again and have a chat and talk of all things Phantom game.
Oh, mate, there's at least 2 more sessions in this. At least 2. At least. Possibly more if we get any inkling of expression of interest from Billy.
and I'm sure, like you've answered a plethora of questions, and even ones we didn't even have written down. So if any fans have got any other questions that we didn't hear today or didn't hear answered today, there's a chance, in a few months' time, hopefully, that we'll be able to put them forward to you.
And let's get the community involved with things like the cover art too. Let's start all that sort of stuff up. I'll be chatting to you guys more offline about what we can do.
Yeah. For sure. You've sorry, remind me of the website. Is it thephantomgame.com?
Thephantomgame.com. Yep.
And so it's pretty simple at the moment. There's just the animated.
Super simple. There's just the sign up there to register your interest, and some of Anthony's awesome work with some animation in there, just to sort of give people a little bit of an idea of the level of art we want in this game. And then over the course of the next year, that's going to keep evolving as we go. We'll throw up images and things like that on there as well. But the socials is where it's going to be mainly at.
Right. Okay.
What's your socials handle? Will it be the Phantom Game, or is it Art of?
It's all the Phantom Game. I'll have to get you guys to post those on your link, because I don't know off the top of my head each individual one.
Yeah, so in the show notes there'll be the link to the website, the hashtag, the Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram handles as well.
Facebook is actually Phantom Game Official.
Do you have it? You mentioned
Phantom
TikTok.
Game Official.
Do you have a TikTok account?
Now.
Yes, I will have a TikTok account, because I have become quite addicted to it over the last 6 months or so.
Yep.
And I think it'd be good to have some of the animation and some of me waffling on various points. I think that'll be definitely on the cards.
Does that mean that we all have to join TikTok now?
That's once you do though, man, it's the wormhole of destruction. It'll suck you right in.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, here it is, the Phantom Game.
Very good. Well, Steve will be your first subscriber. How often do you reckon the notifications will come out for people who do sign up through the website?
We're trying to do at least email newsletters at least once a month, and we're trying to do at least one post a fortnight on social media.
Yep.
Obviously, we can't have it distracting from the actual making of the game, so we've got to try and work out that nice balance. Where what we're showing is we're not having to cultivate things to show online. It can just be as easy as, here's something we've already done. Look at this, move on, sort of thing.
Yep.
So we're trying to be more active on social. I mean, I'm obviously working for Viacom for 10 years. They handled all that sort of stuff. We didn't have to bat an eyelid. Once a game is made, the big machine sort of took control of it, and they did their work. So, But we're slowly getting used to the need for studios like us to sort of just explain things and talk about what we're doing and get people invested, because we're all invested, and I think we're hoping some of that will rub off.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome.
Excellent. Well, I don't know about anyone else, but I am even more excited after speaking with you.
Your hand's not shaking anymore, Steve, at least.
Oh, I don't know if I could have. The amount of energy that has been exuded.
Time for some more Shredder's Revenge, man.
Oh, it's been so exciting.
Let's keep in touch. Like I said, there's at least another couple of podcasts in this.
Awesome.
You'll see me gradually get more disheveled as the year passes. My hair's looking pretty decent at the moment, but it's just going to get worse. That's the process.
That is the process. Yeah.
Excellent, guys.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Anything else there, fellas, before we do the outro? We're all good. Okay, so thanks again, Ash, and we can't wait to have you back on. Looking forward to everything that you're going to drip feed out to us. I really am, and as we were just talking then, I've signed up to the fandom game on Facebook, and I can't wait to see everything you put on there. So for everyone, I hope you've really enjoyed it. I hope you're excited about this game as we are. If you've had any fears about who are these people, who's Ash, what the heck's going on, I hope they've been allayed. You can hear as I mentioned before, you can hear the passion in Ash's voice. You can see the body of work that he's got behind him, and the amount of effort that he's actually putting into the game, working 16-hour days. My God, at some time I'm sure they'll work into a 48-hour day the way he's going at the moment.
Yeah, 48-hour day, I'll be dead by 48, that sort of thing.
So if you have any ideas for questions you'd like us to ask Ash next time, or if you've got any other suggestions about people you'd like to like us to interview or even re-interview, please contact us. You can either contact us on our socials, or you can contact us at our website, chroniclechamber.com, our email at chroniclechamber@gmail.com. If you want to be notified of new articles, ensure that you either follow us on our social or sign up with your email address, and you'll be emailed as soon as something new is posted on our website. You can't miss the pop-up. It's in the bottom right-hand corner. Every time you go to the website, it pops up, even for us. I better just sign up instead of... Hopefully it'll go away if I sign up. And do not forget, if you want early access to all the stuff that Ash has just been talking about, sign up as a Patreon. You will get it. Don't know how much earlier, but you'll get it earlier than everybody else will, at least a few days. And that's always bragging rights. You can subscribe to us via YouTube or through your favourite podcast apps, including iTunes or Spotify. Happy fandoming.
Happy fandoming all.
Thanks, everyone.